Good morning, everyone. My name is Jane, and I am the CAC for Public Water Systems in Coconino and Pinal County. Today, I'll be presenting on the monitoring and reporting requirements for mobile home and RV parks. So before I get started with the monitoring and reporting requirements, I wanted to review the definitions of the three different public water system types: community, non-transient non-community, and transient non-community. Starting off with the community water system, these type of systems have at least 15 service connections that are used by the same people all year round, or serve the same 25 or more people all year round. So for those mobile home or RV parks that serve the same 25 residents all year round, those systems will be classified as community water systems. Also, because these systems are serving the same residents or people all year round, these systems have the most stringent monitoring and reporting requirements, which I will review in my next slides. Non-transient, non-community water systems have at least 15 service connections that are used by the same people for more than 6 months in a year, or serve the same 25 or more people at least 6 months in a year. So for example, there are several RV and mobile home parks in the northern Arizona region that only operate during the summer, and those systems will be classified as non-transient, non-community. These systems have similar monitoring requirements to that of the community water systems, with the exception of radionuclide samples. Transient non-community water systems have at least 15 or more service connections that are not being used by the same people for more than 6 months of the year, or serve at least 25 customers for at least 60 days of the year, but not the same customers for more than 6 months in a year. So for example, a portion of RV parks located in the Coconino Forest are classified as transient non-community, as the campground is occupied for no more than 60 days of the year. These systems have the least stringent monitoring and reporting requirements based on how long the customers are served. And so these systems, they're basically only collecting for, if you're a groundwater system, these systems are essentially just collecting for total coliform and nitrate. Again, based on the type of public water system, the monitoring requirements do differ. So starting with the most stringent monitoring requirement, which is that of the community water system, all community water systems are required to sample for total coliform, lead and copper, disinfection byproduct, and maximum residual disinfectant levels in the distribution system, while the IOCs, SOCs, VOCs, and radionuclides are to be collected at the EPDS location unless directed otherwise. For those community water systems that are sourced by surface water, there is additional monitoring and reporting requirements based on the type of treatment that is used on site. Non-transient, non-community water systems have the same monitoring requirements as that of a community water system, again, with the exception of sampling for radionuclides. And so these systems are required to sample for total coliform, lead and copper, disinfection byproduct, and the maximum residual disinfectant levels in the distribution system, while the IOCs, SOCs, and VOCs are to be collected at the EPDS locations, again, unless directed otherwise. For those non-transient, non-community water systems that are sourced by surface water, again, there is additional monitoring and reporting requirements based on the type of treatment that is used on site. And like I mentioned earlier, transient water systems, again, have the least stringent monitoring requirements. And again, if you are a groundwater system, you are only collecting for total coliform in the distribution system and your nitrate and nitrite at the EPDS locations. So for most systems, there are 3 main sampling locations: the EPDS, well, and distribution system. The EPDS, which is shortened for the entry point to the distribution system, is the compliant sampling point anywhere on the finish line that is representative of a water source. So the tap has to be located after the well or surface water intake, treatment, storage, pressure tank, but it has to be immediately prior to where the water is discharged into the distribution. So it has to be before the first at-risk connection. In this example photo before you all, the EPDS sampling tap is located here after the well, and it's circled for you in the red. Again, it has to be the EPDS sampling point has to be after all facility components, but right before the distribution system. The next is, and then before I move on, samples that are collected at the EPDS, again, are IOCs, SOCs, VOCs, and radionuclides. For those community and non-transient, non-community water systems that participate in ADEQ's Monitoring and Assistance Program, otherwise known as MAPS, all samples that are required to be collected at the EPDS will be collected by MAPS contracted samplers. Next, we have the well taps. Well taps must be located after the well, but before any treatment or the distribution system. Samples that are collected at the well are total coliform and E. coli samples. If a system is required to complete a new source analysis, all those samples must be collected at the source as well. Distribution system, it consists of, moving on to distribution system, the distribution system consists of an interconnected series of components. They usually include pipes, storage facilities, and components that convey drinking water. With RV and mobile home parks, the distribution system samples should be collected at the water hookup tap rather than inside the RV or mobile home. So for the samples that are collected in the distribution, such as total coliform, lead and copper, disinfection byproducts, and myrtles, again, those should be collected at the water hookup tap, illustrated right here. So the well and EPDS sampling tap are much clearer of where you need to collect those samples rather than the distribution. And that's because collecting samples in the distribution depend on the drinking water rules. And so in this slide here, I wanted to review the location along with frequency when it comes to sampling within the distribution system. With total coliform sample, the sample number is determined by the number of customers served. And so as the number of customers served increase, the number of total coliform samples required will increase. Total coliform is required to be sampled by all water systems on a monthly cadence. Please note here that a microbiological sampling site plan, also known as the MSSP, must be approved by ADEQ prior to any sampling. For the community water systems or non-transient, non-community water systems that regularly add and/or deliver that is treated with chlorine or chloramines are required to collect for myrtle and disinfection byproduct samples. Myrtle readings are to be collected at total coliform sampling locations, and these readings are required every time a total coliform sampling is completed. This includes routine and repeat sampling. For example, a system that is required to collect one routine total coliform sample needs to collect one myrtle reading each month. However, if a total coliform sample triggered for additional samples, the myrtle readings must be collected for each repeat sample that was collected. For the systems that are disinfecting, disinfection byproducts, the DBP2 samples must be collected. These samples must be collected in designated sampling locations, and the frequency of monitoring depends on the type of source, so whether it's being sourced by groundwater or surface water, and the number of customers served. I'll explain in greater detail on how to select the sampling location based on the two disinfection byproduct analytes. Also, similar to the MSSP, the disinfection byproduct sampling plan must be approved by ADEQ prior to any sampling. For community and non-transient, non-community water systems, lead and copper samples are required to be collected. Similar to the other samples being collected in the distribution system, the number of samples depend on the number of customers served. When it comes to sampling, ADEQ suggests that these samples are again collected in the water hookup tap. The monitoring schedule can range, and there is opportunity for water systems to be placed on a reduced annual or triennial schedule. If you think your water system applies for a reduced annual or triennial schedule, please reach out to your county CAC. Unlike the MSSP or the disinfection byproduct sampling plan, the LCR sampling plan does not need to be approved by ADEQ prior to sampling and is due at the time of sample it's due at the time of when you submit your sample results. And so in my next slide, I'm going to show you how to select sites for lead and copper. So again, for lead and copper and disinfection byproducts, selecting those sampling locations, the rule states that those locations have to be very specific. So starting with lead and copper, when choosing sampling sites for lead and copper, the system must use a three-tiered approach that's provided by EPA. Again, the two systems that are required to sample for lead and copper are community and non-transient non-community water systems. And so we'll start with community water systems because based on the type of classification of your water system, the tiered requirements are a bit different. So with community water system, a tier 1 is classified as high-risk sites, and therefore the system should ideally select sites from this classification if possible. The highest risk sites are defined as single-family structures that contain copper pipes with lead and solder installed after 1982 or contain lead pipes or served by a lead service line. I want to add here that lead service lines don't just, they're not just saying just lines, but they also include lead pipes, goosenecks, and pigtails. If a system is served by a lead service line, half of the samples should be collected from these locations. And I also want to note here that most RV and mobile home parks are classified as a single-family structure. And so if systems cannot select locations based on this requirement, they should move on to the next tier. In tier 2, the sampling pool consists of buildings that include multiple family residences that contain copper pipes with lead solder installed after 1982 or contain lead pipes. Tier 3 is a sampling pool that consists of single family structures that contain copper pipes with lead solder installed before 1983. After a system has exhausted tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 sites, it may complete its sampling pool with other sites that are representative of the distribution system. And that basically means it's where the plumbing material is commonly found within the distribution system. So again, after you've exhausted your tier 1, 2, 3 options, you can use representative sites. Moving on to the tiered approach for non-transient and non-community water systems, the requirements are a bit less stringent. The high-risk sites include copper pipes with lead solder installed after 1982 or contain lead pipes. Tier 3 sampling pool consists of single-family structures that contain copper pipes with lead solder installed before 1983. Again, if you cannot find sampling sites in tier 1, 2, 3, the system can use representative sites. Due to the way the sample site is selected, the sites can actually vary year to year, and that's why the sampling plan is due at the time of sample submission. And in the sampling plan, the system must explain the change in site. It has to essentially explain why the sampling site has changed from the previous monitoring. Moving on to disinfection byproduct, EPA actually published the rule in 2006. The rule includes a provision requiring all community water systems and non-transient non-community water systems that serve more than 10,000 people to conduct an initial distribution system evaluation, also known as IDSC. The goal of the IDSC is to characterize the distribution system and identify monitoring sites where customers may be exposed to high levels of total trihalomethane, TTHMs, and haloacetic acids, HA5. And so based on the IDSC report, monitoring was based on the month with the highest DBP concentration. So for the systems that need to select, that are newly chlorinating and need to select sites for your for the disinfection byproduct rule, when you are selecting sampling sites, you have to consider the two DBP analytes, which are TTHM and HA5. So you are selecting sites based on the analytes characteristics. So starting with TTHM, the system should select sites with high temperatures and increased residence time. You want to select sites with higher water temperatures because it can lead to higher TTHM concentration. And also, higher water temperatures during summer seasons can increase DBPs as the chemical reactions happen faster at higher temperatures. Also, it can cause a higher chlorine demand, requiring an increased disinfectant dose and resulting in higher DBP formation potential. So selecting sites with increased residence time is also important because the highest TTHM site is expected to be at a point in the distribution with the longest water age. So the longer the contact time between the disinfection and the precursors, the greater the amount of TTHM that can be formed. Most of the sites with the increased residence time can actually be found near the end of the distribution. If you can find sites with these conditions, downstream of the storage facility is another great option. Downstream of tanks or reservoirs are suspected of TTHM because storage facilities typically increase water age and possibly temperature. So selecting sites in the mixing zones where water from different sources combine within the distribution is also another great sampling site location. For HA5s, HA5s are a bit different from TTHMs because HA5s may not be the highest in areas of longest water age. HA5s will increase as water age increases, but only up to a certain point. And this is because HA5s biodegrade in areas of very low residual areas and where biological activities are present. So the main intention in selecting these sites is to avoid areas of biofilm and other biological activity. And so when selecting sites for HA5, avoid areas with low flow rates and dead ends, and you want to select sites that have less than average residual, which shows a longer residual time or residence time, but you still want some residual. You want it not very low or zero residual. And similar to TTHM, you want to select sites with warmer temperature since this increases concentration, and then selecting sites in the mixing zones. Next, I wanted to briefly go over the monitoring period, frequency, and when samples are due to ADEQ. Samples must be collected within the monitoring frame to be counted as compliant. And as a general rule, most samples are due 10 days after the end of the monitoring period. So for example, for the upcoming November 2021 total coliform samples, systems must collect the sample by November 30th and submit to ADEQ by December 10th. The same principle applies for systems on quarterly and reduced monitoring. Also, please make sure to submit all compliance data to wqd_compliance_data@azdeq.gov. As we continue to work remotely, mailed-in data cannot be processed in the same manner as it previously was, and so we highly encourage electronic submission. CMDP is also available as an option for those labs that are interested. If you are interested, please reach out. You can actually reach out to me, and I'll connect you with our program coordinator here. And before we end today, I wanted to go over a list of common reports that need to be submitted. First off, the Consumer Confidence Report, also known as the CCR. All community water systems are required to submit an annual water quality report to ADEQ by July 1st annually. The report has to be complete and accurate before ADEQ can accept the report. And so I highly encourage all systems to submit their report well before the deadline so that the CACs can review it for accuracy, and if corrections are needed, the systems have ample time. After submitting the CCR, systems are required to submit either the mailing waiver or mailing certificate. The mailing waiver or mailing certificate must be submitted to ADEQ by October 1st. Next, we have the lead consumer notice and lead consumer notice certificate. For the systems that collect lead and copper samples, a lead consumer notice must be delivered to the residents or buildings or to the building that sampling took place, and it must be completed within 30 days of receiving the results. ADEQ will also need a copy of the LCN delivered along with an LCN certificate. And the LCN certificate is normally due 3 months after the end of the monitoring period. Next, we have the OEL report, which is the operational evaluation levels. So these reports are only required. These reports only apply to systems that are on quarterly monitoring for disinfection byproduct, and they're only required when an OEL exceedance occurs. They need to be submitted to ADEQ within 90 days of receiving the lab results. And last but not least, we have the level 1 and level 2 assessments. These assessments are triggered when the system has a confirmed total coliform or E. coli positive sample. These assessments are used to identify sanitary defects that have triggered the assessment and is due within 30 days of triggering the assessment. And with that, that is the end of my presentation. If I have any questions, I will take them.
Hi, Jane. Thanks for that presentation. I believe Joel Johnston has a question. He has his hand raised, and Joel, I am going to unmute you so you can ask your question.
No, I just pressed the wrong button. Sorry about that.
No problem. Does anyone else have any questions for Jane? Okay, we have one right here. Are RV parks on municipal water subject to testing?
If your RV park is being served by a city, normally the sampling is done at the city, so there shouldn't be requirements at the RV park unless the RV park is still a water system and there is a consecutive connection between the water system and the RV park. So in order to actually answer that question easier, if the RV park is still established as a water system, then yes, there is monitoring requirements. However, if the RV park is just a connection to is connected to the municipal water system and no longer a water system, then no, there is no monitoring requirements.
Next question is, we know that the EPA is changing the lead and copper rule. Is that going to change anything with determining sampling sites?
There may be changes to the sampling locations, but as of now, we are still trying to have a better understanding on how to roll this rule out. So when we have a better answer, we will let our systems know.
Okay, I think those were all the questions for you, Jane. Thank you for your presentation.